Brno and Pilsen in the Czech Republic. And he's been one of the main editors at Oxford, in Oxford Dictionary. I don't know what the company is called, but you know, OED. And at Collins, worked on the Colville Dictionary, and he got his PhD relatively recently in Brno. So here is Patrick Hanks. He's the most famous lexicographer that I know.
Thank you. How many lexicographers do you know?
Well,
No, we won't go into
Okay, I was going to answer, and it's bigger than one.
I know, it's me and Sue Atkins.
Well, and I would have thought Sinclair is a kind of a lexicographer too.
Yes.
So if I was squeezed,
I'm not sure. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is a lexicographical approach to language analysis, in particular corpus analysis, addressing the problem, how do people use words to make meanings, and how can meanings be derived from text and processed. And the method we used is called CPA, corpus pattern analysis. Every worthwhile project has to have its TLA, or three-letter acronym. So the first step is to take a sample concordance, classify every line in the sample, relating the collocates to a shallow semantic type system, a really shallow semantic type system, 40 or 50 types and growing slowly. The types are motivated according to the needs of the system, and I'm under constant pressure from my colleague Anna Rumszewski to keep the number of types down. They are motivated by the need to explain data. I'll show you some examples later. After we've taken a sample concordance, typically a sample concordance will consist of 200 or 300 lines of examples of the word in use, unless, of course, it is less frequent than that. If it's more frequent, for example, in the case of a highly polysemous word, we will then go and take further samples, and we will even at that stage go on fishing expeditions for data to see whether "take the plunge" really is a phrase of English, or whether it's extremely rare. But what we don't do is invent data. We invent explanations, and we don't start with a fishing expedition looking for examples that will support our theory. We try to allow the theory to arise out of the data. So I said every line in the sample must be classified. Well, the classes are norms. So each word is used in one or more normal way. Exploitations of norms. Alternations are at its most basic. If you take a photograph, you can also take a photo. You can also take a snap. You can also take a picture. That's about it. There's not many more words in that little lexical set. So there are alternations. There are also causative, inchoative alternations, which are pretty regular. If they're very frequent, we say that both the causative and the inchoative is a pattern. If one is much more frequent than the other, we say that one is an exploitation of the other or is an alternation of the other according to a regular rule. Exploitations I'm coming to later. We have, since every line in the corpus must be analysed, we have to do some stupid things, some very basic things, like acknowledging that midnight storm is not a type of storm, but it could be, but it isn't in this corpus. It's a racehorse, name of a racehorse. We have to acknowledge that mentioning a word or a phrase is not to use it. So every linguistic textbook has examples of idioms. And most of them mention to kick the bucket as being an example of an English idiom. If you look in the British National Corpus, I think you will find 11 occurrences of kick near bucket. Kick, kicks, kicking, kicks, kicked. In 3 or 4 of them, there is actually a story in which a cow kicks a bucket over. In 6 of them, there are mentions of kick the bucket from linguistic textbooks. These will shed no light whatsoever on how the expression kick the bucket is used. The other 2 are impenetrable. In fact, they come down as unassignable. So having looked at the British National Corpus for kick the bucket, we're no further forward. That's an extreme case. Mistakes are interesting. Obviously, if I tell you that I learned, if I tell you that I learned German in the 1960s in Berlin, I've made some kind of mistake. I only mention this because we have to be able to classify errors. And I think there are semantic errors. Many worthy liberal linguists claim that the native speaker's utterances are so privileged that the native speaker cannot make a mistake. I won't detain you on that, but I think that that is not right. And finally, there are unassignables. There are cases where however much you widen the context around the keyword, trying to work out exactly what the speaker or writer meant, you remain baffled as to why the speaker or writer used this particular word, and so one needs a class of unassignables. If the unassignables become too large, or if the exploitations or alternations become too large, then we start to think, oh, well, maybe we're missing a norm here. I seem to have 2 E's here, never mind. Some problematic line E's. Okay, so one of the things, so here are some examples of some sentences which I would like to be able to explain. I hazarded, says the British National Corpus, says some writer in the British National Corpus, I hazarded various Stuart-esque destinations like Bali, Florence, Istanbul. His fit seemed to have abated. What is his fit? Is this something to do with the suit he was wearing? A storm of laughter arose. Why is storm problematic here? I'll try and explain later if we have time. Dubrovnik became a mousetrap, and Chopper is bringing the hood to the birds. I won't attempt to say that in American English, but you know what I mean. What's going on in those lines, in those uses? So we're doing something really almost as extraordinary as any other kind of linguistic isolation. We're looking at a little local context around each word. And, okay, just to tell you where I'm coming from, here's some theoretical background. I think that prototype theory was very liberating for lexicographers, at least. I've never forgotten the excitement in the early 1970s of hearing George Lakoff saying that some birds are more birdy than others. Yes, I thought, right, that makes lexicography possible. We're trying to define perhaps the Platonic ideal bird, but not all and only possible birds. Another big influence is Yorick Wilkes's preference semantics, which Ray Jackendorf thinks he invented, but he invented it later. But I mean, Jack, I don't mean to be snidey. Jackendorf's take on preference semantics is interesting and influential on the early Halliday. Halliday is increasingly influential on our work. Both his notion of linguistic functions and his early work on slot and filler grammar. This is what we're doing here is slot and filler, in which clause roles play a very important part. And then discourse analysis and lexis analysis. So 2 key texts are Halliday's lexis as a linguistic level, and Sinclair's beginning the study of lexis, both in a 1966 volume in memory of J.R. Firth. Lexical statistics, my own work with Ken Church, obviously. I'm glad to say it is moderately influential on my current work. I haven't abandoned it completely. And wonderfully, Adam Kilgareth and David Tugwell, if you don't know the WASPS project at the University of Brighton, at ITRI, I-T-R-I, it is well worth having a look at. It takes, basically it takes it will give you, for any noun or verb of English that you care to mention, an account of the collocational of the significant collocations in clausal relationships, in syntagmatic relations to the main text. This is tremendously helpful for lexicographical analysis. And finally, especially when we come to exploitations, I draw on Pustyovsky's generative lexicon theory. I'm not going to say too much about that today, partly because I'm rethinking it. Okay, when we do the method, when we analyze corpus lines, what do we do? Well, the first thing we do is we're trying to focus on the probable, on the basis of what happened, what has happened, what is observable. We try to make predictions about what is likely to happen. We don't try to account for all and only anything. So we're trying to provide a basis on which probabilities can be calculated, can be computed. Norms, obviously, I have to say this in Germany because the German word Normen is generally taken as being prescriptive. Obviously, what we're doing is empirically describing the language. Okay, and why exploitations? Well, a big problem for corpus analysts is that there are, for many words, there are a number of uses which are perfectly idiomatic, well-formed sentences of English that are in some way unusual. People exploit norms in order to say new things, or in order to say old things in new and interesting ways. So they don't just reuse the same old words in the same old ways. And we'll see some examples of metaphor, ellipsis, word creation, other figures of speech. Okay, so what does a norm look like? Well, in English, this is a shorthand version, but it looks a bit like this. This is about as simple as it can get. We say, so we can detect, I can detect roughly 5 patterns, well, actually 5 patterns for the use of the verb abate, not a very frequent verb, in the British national corpus. A storm abate, there are just 4% of the uses out of 185, where there's a flood abating. Just enough to say, okay, well, we could say this is a norm rather than a problem. It's certainly not an abstract thing, and and saying that a flood is a storm is kind of stretching it a bit. You can see that there's a good deal of lexicographical art in making these decisions about how to group things. We could have said that floods abating is an exploitation of storms or problems abating. But then the kind of problems that I'm driven to mention in these patterns by my colleague Anna Rumszewski, who's doing the computing end of things, is to is to introduce lots and lots of equal signs. So we have high-level semantic types here, and then a much more delicate assignment. So how does this work in practice? Well, you can see that the British National Corpus, this is just a selection. There are many more. examples. Lots of storms abating, including a rainstorm. But then there's the weather. What sort of weather was it? Well, it wasn't sunshine or a heat wave. Gales are somehow semantically associated with storms, and so on.
You would object to heat wave abating?
I wouldn't object to it. I just didn't find it. And I'm saying that if it occurred, there'd be something abnormal about it. In fact, what I would want to say about it is that somehow a heat wave abating, the notion of a heat wave abating, if I find it in actual text and have to account for it, I'm going to say that it's exploiting the notion of weather being problematic and storm-like. So the heat wave is not just pleasant sunshine. It would be very odd, and we'll see some...
So abate does not just mean attenuation of something unpleasant.
Well, it sort of means that, doesn't it?
So that's why I would have thought heat wave could abate that also. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, could. I mean, I said this 3 times today to various people. Could is the operative word in what you... Yeah, you could do that. Be unusual. That's the point. Okay, there is a huge number of abstract problems abating, but here are just a few examples. Inflation abating, fast threat, the intifada, the recession, ferocity of sectarian politics, and so on. I'll move along quickly. And I separated out, after much agonizing emotional problems, problematic emotions, not just emotions. If you say that his love for her abated, you are implying, I think, you're implying weakly that his love for her was in some way problematic, not just a wholly good thing, as we would all like love to be, because of the anxiety, awkwardness, pressure, agony, pain, shock, and fear that are normally associated with all of which, of course, could be associated with his love for her. Okay. Now, next thing we have to do is those things in double square brackets have to be tied into an empirically well-founded ontology. I'm afraid the lines, I did something stupid and I seem to have lost the lines between dog and pet and dog and animate. But at its most simple, we all know that that the idealization, that the sort of top-down hierarchies with neat trees are not very realistic. So dogs are members of the, well, actually I should have put mammal, shouldn't I? So dogs are mammals and dogs are pets. Canaries are not mammals, but they are pets. So that problem is multiplied hugely. The abstract, the hierarchy of abstract nouns that we see in WordNet seems to be total fiction, and you could rearrange it in an infinite number of alternative ways with equal truth, with equal validity. There is no reason, as far as no reason that I can see, I may be in trouble here, but I can see no reason for saying that a concept is an idea rather than an idea is a concept, or was it the other way round? I forget which way they do it, but whichever way they do it, as far as I'm concerned, concept and idea are just abstract nouns, and we need to flatten that hierarchy. In fact, we need to flatten WordNet in many ways. Fair enough to have mammals being vertebrates, being animate entities, but they have chordates between vertebrates and animates, or is it below vertebrates? I forget which. Why? I mean, are there chordates that are not vertebrates, or vice versa? I don't know. I think there's a tremendous confusion in WordNet between scientific concepts, which and logical concepts, which are the sort of concepts that Frege would have been proud of, nice, clean things, and word meanings, which are nasty, dirty things. I'm interested in the nasty, dirty things. Okay, and the last thing to say is that we really need totally separate hierarchies for verbs and nouns. At the moment, I'm only need to imply noun hierarchies. Just to give you an idea of the sort of, if you start to populate, I very rarely do this because it's incredibly time consuming, but if you try to populate the set of abstracts equals problems, and you look in the British National Corpus and the Associated Press for 91-92, which happens to be the best thing, the nearest thing that I can get to an American corpus, you find firstly some words recurring, which I've highlighted, fighting and fighting, tensions and tensions. In among this this curious hodgepodge of lexical items, I detect a common semantic theme. I hope you do too. Much smaller is the set of emotions that abate, but anxiety, rage, anger, fear, and so on, and emotion itself. If somebody's emotion abated, you know what sort of emotion it is, because in J.R. Firth's immortal words, you shall know a word by the company it keeps. The company is both syntagmatic and paradigmatic. Here are the paradigm sets that contribute to our understanding of the word emotion in the context of abate. Before I leave abate, this is about the most simple verb in English. So the story gets more complicated. You should be aware that at least in British English, there is a domain-specific norm. Firstly, it's transitive. Secondly, I forgot to change nuisance to event equals nuisance, but you get the idea. In British legal jargon, if your neighbour is making a smell, if you live next to a pig farm, your lawyer will write to him requiring not to stop making the smell, but to abate the odour. Domain-specific norms are important. What is the nuisance of bugles? Noise, it turns out, is a nuisance. It is legally defined as a nuisance. So smells and noise appear to be the main statutory nuisances. Okay, so having found some some examples manually, the current idea, some people have said to me, you don't need step one. This would be great. That relieves me of a hell of a lot of work. But we can find members of the sets by cluster analysis of the corpus. They go around in gangs, we hope. The words go around in gangs. They co-occur in other slots in relation to other verbs. But at this stage in the game, we certainly need a human analyst to verify that the members of the sets really are good members of the sets. But we can then, I hope, sort of start to introduce semi-automation by some tentative disambiguation of other verbs using the lexical sets we've got, and we can go on to discover other lexical sets. I don't know how far it is possible to automate that. At the moment it's all done manually, and that's partly because we don't want to automate prematurely. It's partly because I don't have the computing skills to do it automatically, and partly because efforts that I've seen at premature automation lead to plausible but wrong results. So lexical sets, firstly they're different in kind from syntactic structures, as I hope has been apparent. The membership of a lexical set is in principle open-ended. When you've thought of all the members of a lexical set, even a small lexical set, it's always in principle possible to think, well, there might be one more. A lexical set, nevertheless, may have only one or two members. You take a look or a glance, and then it falls off pretty sharply. We found there may be another word meaning look or glance that you can take and have this sense, but it's not a large set. There are some huge sets, couldn't possibly be enumerated extensionally, like all the abstract things, all the events that there are. You couldn't go. Only a lexicographer would even dream of trying to list all the events that there ever have been, or could be, or will be. Of course, you can only come up with probabilities. There are no certainties. So the answer to the question, can you say this in English, should always be, you could, but maybe you wouldn't. But probabilities, of course, can be measured. Let's just give you a flavour of what a more complicated verb is like, and I want to cite a couple of examples. The verb take, I've done a preliminary analysis of the verb take, which is about as bad as it gets. Of course, take in itself has almost no meaning. It has almost no meaning potential. It has, do I mean that? No, I think it has, so words on the isolation have comparatively little meaning. In context, the meaning becomes much more definite. I found 61 phrasal verb patterns, some examples, 105 light verb uses. These are easy to spot because they have lexically specific objects. So an event takes place, a person takes a photograph, a person takes the plunge. Here are the heavy ones. These are the really hard ones to identify and process. The generic, semantically heavy uses. A person takes a physical object in an adverbial direction. I take a book off the shelf, or I can take the car to Baltimore. There are 13 patterns where the interesting thing seems to be adverbial. Top type means anything at all. So a person can take anything at all seriously, and a human group, probably a local authority, I don't know what the American for that is, will take a child into care. Into care is what tells you what's going on in relation to take. So you put the context together to get the meanings. So I've got 204 patterns for take, and they're growing but very slowly. They should be mutually exclusive. This is the idea. I mean, they're not much use if we can't use them to disambiguate one sense of a word or a phrase from one sense of a word in context from another, from another sense of the same word in different contexts. But we can postulate lexical sets and then find there is ambiguity. So I showed you events taking place. I mentioned events taking place earlier. Now we have a person taking his place. Okay, but that's ambiguous because we don't know whether this is co-referential with that or not. He took his place at the table versus he took Fred's place. He took Fred's place at the table. This can be resolved by restating the pattern. We're left with some. What is astonishing is that on so little context, local context around the word, so much disambiguation can be achieved. But we are left with some cases where once you've done all the local context in the normal patterns, ambiguity remains. And you have to go right outside the whole pattern analysis paradigm to get a disambiguation. In CPA, noun norms are different in kind from verb norms, and a different apparatus is required. So what we come up with, driven by the corpus, looking at the nouns, saying what are the nouns doing, are something which remind me of early English and ancient Germanic gnomic poetry. There is a species of very ancient poetry in Old English in which statements are made like rain shall fall. And so what do storms do? Well, storms shall blow, storms shall rage, storms shall lash coastlines, storms batter ships and places, or hit them, or ravage coastlines and other places. Very much associated with, in British English at least, it may be different in Kansas, but in British English at least, there's storms seem to be associated with the sea. Again, to take an extreme example, I'm interested in how words are used in the culture I'm living in, or the culture I'm reporting, not in anything that is scientific or logical. So when I find that in British English there's a significant association between spiders and baths, I have to report that. But if you tried to take a bath in England, anybody here been to England, tried to take a bath, you have to get the spider out of the bath before you can put the water in. There are a lot of, for some reason, there are a lot of spiders in England, and they seem to live in our bathrooms. Okay, another set. So this is all one norm, but it's much more extended. So when we could say the storm is beginning, but it's more normal to say it's brewing or gathering or impending. We talk about the lull before the storm or a calm before the storm. It's associated with expressions of time and so on. Then here's our friend abate again. So in this case, it's a two-way relationship. It doesn't have to be, but it's reciprocal. Abate is significantly associated with storm, and storm is significantly associated with abate. Well, you can go through a storm, but it is normal phraseology in English to talk about weathering a storm, surviving a storm, or riding out a storm, or getting caught in a storm. Different kinds of storms, you can list them. Both the classifying adjectives and the attributive qualitative adjectives that are used to describe storms. Again, all of this can be got out of the corpus. And so on and so forth. Finally, I think this is finally, there are unstructured associations with nouns, not so much with verbs, but so one has a sort of ragbag at the end, saying that rain, wind, hurricanes, gales and floods occur in the local context around storm in no particular syntagmatic relation. This is quite important. I mean, people like Frank Smudger think that true collocates are syntagmatically structured, but I don't see why we should accept his particular view of true collocates. True collocates are just in the same place, okay, or in nearby. Doesn't have to be structured. On the other hand, structure helps. Okay. Well, so statements like this, it seems to be it looks as if I perhaps was writing them up for some sort of child's textbook or ignorant computers textbook, but actually they are simply come out of the corpus and have been a little bit arranged. So some of the connecting words are mine, but the content words are significant in the corpus. They seem to represent some central and typical beliefs. I'm starting to feel Jungian here about the collective unconscious of English speakers. If you are going to talk about about storms in English, these are the things you have to believe. Maybe storms in the Sahara Desert are completely different, but I'm sure they are. So I feel that in a language, this is somewhat what we're looking at is where syntax meets semantics. Now I want to say a word or two about exploitations, so how the norms are exploited. So, what is his fit at abated? I think most probably we would want to say that it's is it an emotion? Is it a storm? Is it an abstract problem? Well, I think that a good way to look at this is to say that it draws weakly on all of these stronger associations in order to get an interpretation. So we interpret words in context by analogy with their prototypical use, and this project is aiming at stating their prototypical uses. I cut out some stuff about metaphor because I don't think I got it right, but I do want to say that, of course, the most typical form of exploitation is metaphor. I want to make a strong distinction between dynamic metaphors, which nobody's ever uttered before. Dubrovnik became a mousetrap. Donald Davison cites Schopenhauer as saying that a geometrical proof is a mousetrap. And here's one from the British National Corpus. It is good to see that the railway is keeping its head above water. Well, you can see that that has to be metaphorical for obvious reasons. So I want to return sometime later to how metaphors relate to normal uses of the words involved. How do they, but it seems to be quite clear that there is some mechanism by which the normal use of each of the items involved is exploited for communicative and rhetorical effect. The distinction is with conventionalized metaphors, which are just norms. So I'm going to talk. Well, I think at the conclusion, there is a sort of continuum. I might as well say it now. There's a continuum. There's an analogy continuum. A dynamic metaphor is coined. Somebody says it for the first time. People think, oh, that's a good idea. It catches on in the language. It becomes a conventional metaphor. It has torrents of abuse. It's a conventionally metaphorical sense. The privileged sense of torrents of abuse, torrents of language is equally common in the British National Corpus with torrents flowing down a mountainside. So it's become conventionalized, but part of its conventionalization is that it still has metaphorical status. Ask an English speaker whether torrents of abuse is the literal sense, and most people will say no. But maybe...
How do they know?
That's an interesting question. I have an answer to that, and I think I may come to it. Basically, on the basis of the syntagmatics, but why don't we talk about that later? Because or if I don't cover it, ask me again. I do have an answer. Okay, so conventional metaphors are norms. Here are some conventional metaphors. Norms, of course, prototypicality is recursive. Do I mean recursive is iterative? So having established an exploitation of a prototype, that new prototype can then be exploited. So take a location by storm. Do I have the examples here? Yeah, okay. So the domain matters. So it starts, there are examples going back certainly to the 16th century in English of people taking a place by storm in a military sense. But then that is exploited for other kinds of places. A novel taking Paris by storm. How do we know that's a metaphor built on a metaphor? Well, we have to know firstly that that is a metaphor, conventional metaphor, and we have to know that it's now become quasi-literal in a military sense in order to understand how a work of literature is exploiting the same notion.
Are you asserting that the first line is different from the others? In other words,
yes, yes.
Because take by storm is an attack.
Yes.
And the other one is metaphorically an attack.
Yes. But when somebody first, back in the 16th century or before, maybe in a language other than English long before, the notion of taking a place by storm was metaphorical. The attacking army was likened to hail and rain and wind and all the confusion arising in a storm, in a meteorological storm. So, and then, but there is a continuum. So the conventionalized metaphor eventually becomes the literal meaning. Not many English speakers think that subject and object are metaphorical expressions, but go back to early Latin, and it's very metaphorical. A subjectum is something thrown under, and an objectum is something thrown in the way, or an obstacle. So subjects and objects in all their modern senses come from something being thrown under or in the way. The metaphorical sense, of course, has long since died. And eventually, the literal sense itself may die, or becomes rare or obsolete. So there's this sort of continuum. Okay, there are also clues for conventional metaphoricity. This is the answer that I was looking for. You don't talk about a storm of rain, you do talk about a storm of protest. You can also talk about a storm of all sorts of other things. When I say can, I mean it's found in the British National Corpus.
Isn't that a problem? I mean, suppose I write an article and it sneaks into the British National Corpus. So now I'm not a native speaker, and all of a sudden you're going to give me legitimacy by saying, use this phrase, and now it's okay, but the other phrases were not used yet. And
yes, I'm going to say, one of the things I would like to say is that the foreign learner, I'm assuming you're speaking of yourself as a foreign learner.
That's
It's hard to think of you as a foreign learner, I'm afraid, but the foreign learner's mistake may be the same form of words as the creative writers' exploitation. But in the one case it's being done for rhetorical effect, and in the other case it's being done because the guy doesn't have other strategies.
I do it for rhetorical effect also.
Okay, well then that's good. Yeah.
but it's a misguided.
Okay. But yes. Yeah. But remember, we're talking about exploitations here. You couldn't by yourself pass as evidence for a norm. Your usage couldn't pass as evidence for normal.
But if it sneaks into the British National Corpus, you will start using it, right?
Yeah. No, I may use it as an example of exploitation. I can't use it as an example of a norm unless you're using it exactly the same way as lots and lots of other English speakers. Okay. So you have lots of storms of negative reactions, typically a storm of protest or a political storm. Okay, this one is interesting. Do you know which text this line comes from? It's thank you. It's Lord of the Flies. Okay, a storm of laughter. Is laughter negative? No, it isn't. Is it negative in the context of Lord of the Flies, in this particular passage of Lord of the Flies? There's more to it than storm plus laughter, but the combination is exploiting protest, tears, emotion, bad things. Same with storm of applause. Do you know what BUF stands for? I think it's the British United Front. What is the British United Front? It's a neo-fascist party. The storm of applause is the writer is choosing the words, consciously or unconsciously, to reflect their negative association.
But why do you give him credit? I mean, he may be a clod, and he used this because he's really...
I'm not giving him credit, I'm giving the language credit. It's there in the language. I'd be totally unaware of it, but I see it as being there.
No, but
It would
aren't
be
you
a normal
asserting
word
that
to
he used the storm of applause to somehow, I don't know, denigrate the buff followers?
That's what I would like to believe.
Yes,
That's a
exactly,
strong
but-
interpretation. That's a maybe. Oh yeah, there's hundreds of fists raised behind you.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, I think part of the question is the question about sampling, right? About the sampling. Is it appropriate to use the BNC as an appropriate sampling base? Like if you're looking really over all dialogue that's ever uttered,
Yes.
then that's something different. But the BNC is
Yeah.
small.
Yeah. That's that. Yes. Okay. Point well taken. You've got to start somewhere. So what I'm going to say is, here's the equivalent of what is it, 5 or 10 years reading for an insidious human being who doesn't stop for anything except occasional sleep, has no conversation. Language exposure, tremendous amount of language. These are the norms that I see in the corpus, and some of the exploitations that I see in the corpus. Yeah, sure there will be others. Yeah, sure you can overinterpret the data, but this at least we see occurring. We can modify it in the light of other corpora at some future date, but at least we will then have something to modify. You've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, no, so I thought the writer here was actually using storm for a different reason, to evoke stormtroopers.
Yes, well, I mean, why not? It's yeah. I think all of these things can be present. You can overdo the literary criticism bit, but this is what Fred's nodding enthusiastically. Okay, well we'll leave the literary criticism. I happen to agree with you, but you can overinterpret it. It's certainly
the comment is just that there might be a lot of pressures on word choice, and it might not be the particular one that you're looking at.
Yeah.
At that moment.
Yeah, and I mean, language happens so quickly. We can sit here and agonize over this, but you'd be pretty sure the writer didn't. Had better things to do. Okay, so when I say here metaphoricity, I mean conventional metaphoricity. It seems to be there seem to be syntagmatic clues going on in the language. One of them is this partitive of, with words like storm, torrent, ocean, rivers, lake. I don't know how far this extends. I would love to find out, but life is short. Mostly it's blood, debt, Greek or abuse. I don't think Greek's such a bad thing. Protest and emotion. But here we have custard. Okay, you can maybe custard's a bad thing. No, you could overinterpret this. I take your point. Was it your point? No, it's your point. Okay, you can overinterpret it. But another clue, a causative verb. What sort of storm did he cause? Or did she cause? Well, it wasn't rain, wind, thunder and lightning. I didn't find any in the British National Corpus. I asked my former colleague Ramesh Krishnamurthy to look in the Bank of English, which is 450 million words of English, and he found one occurrence where there was a human being causing a real storm. The human being actually wasn't a human being at all, although it said he. It was an American Indian god or spirit. Okay, so we exploit normal a word is a norm. We exploit normal words to create new normal words. So bringing the hood to the burbs, I think works something like this. People in Europe swallow this. Do you buy this? Do you buy this explanation? Is this sort of right? The context is some rapper, I think his name was Chopper, was fired by his record company for bringing the hood to the burbs. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Somebody here. What would this mean? It was bad. Clear that he did a bad thing. What was the bad thing that he did? Well, I would like to say that I would like to believe that what this means is that he brought the behavior that is characteristic of a poor neighborhood to a respectable and peaceable suburb. But whatever it means, I think it's a beautiful phrase. Okay, we talked about the analogy continuum, so I won't...
And this phrase is in the British National Corpus?
Bringing the hood to the burbs, no, I picked it up on
Well,
the
I
television. But it's authentic.
But it's created, well, okay.
Okay, so what time did I start?
Well, you started a little late, you have another 5 minutes.
All right, well, I'm at my conclusion already, so that's good. So the goals of corpus pattern analysis is to create an inventory of semantically motivated syntagmatic patterns. So it will be actually, it's a crazy idea, a dictionary of English sentences. Not so crazy when one looks at just how patterned the language is. The normal sentences of English are very striking. The possible sentences of English are, as we all know, infinite in number. We wanted some sort of program for clustering these lexical sets. We want to get evidence for the principles that govern exploitations of norms. It seems to me that we start with metaphor. Oh, did I explain Stuart? Did I explain she hazarded various Stuart-esque destinations?
No, you didn't. It was on the
first slide. Okay,
Yeah.
let me just explain it. I must have deleted it during. Okay. It seems to me it's a very clear case of exploitation by ellipsis. What do you do to a destination to hazard it? Answer, nothing. But if you accept that what you normally hazard is a guess, then she must have guessed at various destinations. She hazarded a guess at various destinations characteristic of Stuart. Would sort of make more sense, but be less compact and poetic. There's a lot of ellipsis around, and there's a lot of coercion around. Okay, I don't want to go into that. So we're trying to construct evidence for the principles that govern the exploitations of norms, as well as evidence for what the norms are. And we're trying to give if you accept the notion that a word in isolation has tremendous entropy, then we're trying to look at how that entropy is reduced when the words are actually used. And a second bout of conclusions. People both use norms and exploit them. They can be exploited explicitly. The rules for exploiting them can also be stated explicitly. The whole language system is probabilistic and preferential. I think that's probably less controversial now than it once was, and there are no necessary conditions. Thank you.
Well, I'll ask.
Oh no, surely not.
So suppose we had, like you did this preliminary analysis for take, you said, right? And you sure didn't show it to us, right? I mean,
how long have you got?
No, because I know exactly. That's my point.
I can show it.
No. I don't doubt that you've done it, but it's probably enormous, right? It's probably enormous.
Yes.
And then there
There's
are
204 items with supporting examples.
Exactly, and other words are almost equally as complex, etc.
A few, but
So, suppose you were able to do this for all the frequent words of English. So
I only want to do it for the verbs at this stage.
okay, well, so for the frequent verbs of English.
Yeah. Well, for all the verbs of English.
I know, but how would mankind benefit from it? I don't mean that you shouldn't do it. I mean by it, how would you publish it, or how would you make it available, or
Yeah. Okay. Well,
where would this work go?
yeah. I can make some suggestions about possible answers. Firstly, I think that implicit in it is a revision of, or some, there are theoretical implications. So yeah, I would simply want to publish, I would want to work out what, do want to work out what and I am working out what the theoretical implications are. And sometimes I think I've made a great discovery and then I find that I've just rediscovered something that everybody knew already. And sometimes I think we have got a great new discovery, and sometimes we find things in received theory that don't work very well when held up against this, starting with the term selectional restrictions. Because what we see is that the data, what I see is the data can really only be satisfactorily explained by explaining selectional constraints in terms of selectional preferences. So that's one answer. Another answer is that that when I look at the activities of my friends in the in the natural language processing industry, whether they're doing inferencing or message understanding or machine translation, it seems to me that that what they lack is something that is a basic lexicographical resource that the lexicographers have failed to provide. Namely this: I'm a lexicographer, I should provide it. I have this appetite for large quantities of very boring work, and which you need to be a lexicographer. So I would think that both computer sciences and pedagogues, I think it has pedagogical implications. I think that that for those who are going to go into English language teaching, knowing how the word is normally used is really important for teaching learners to encode English or whatever language normally. And they're taught so much that so much of their time is wasted with, well, I think of one well-known English textbook, very successful English textbook, which starts with dialogues about checking an umbrella into a into the cloakroom at a restaurant. Well, how many learners of English, how many foreign learners of English? You see my point. So I think we can get a focus on what normally happens and how the words are normally used, and we can also, I think it has, incidentally, goodness, I'm running out. I'm maybe overdoing the implications. I think it has some implications for literary theory. I think much literature depends on the exploitations of norms. Let's see how the great writers have exploited the norms rather than pretending that, as Johnson and the OED do, pretending that they are the norms. Sure, Shakespeare created some norms, some phraseology in Shakespeare has become established, but more often he's exploiting the language for poetic effect. We need to make that distinction. We need to know when Jane Austen talks about, when one of Jane Austen's characters says, "I love to see a woman's enthusiasm, Fanny," he said. But much stronger term, enthusiasm was a much stronger term for Jane Austen, because in the 18th century it was associated with religious fundamentalism, being filled with the Spirit of God and rolling and shaking and speaking in tongues. And in America it became established as a term for a positive reaction. But you look at the high church English writers and philosophers of the 18th century. Well, John Locke devotes 17th and 18th century. John Locke devotes an entire chapter to an attack on enthusiasm. This is incomprehensible if you take the modern meaning. So we need to know what the norms of the past were, as well as what the norms of the present are, and what the implications and implicatures that can be associated. So you name it, I've got an application.
I'm wondering about, I guess it's a point Fred raised, or I guess you raised it as well, with respect to these norms, when you talked about dating and distinguishing between, well, and there are other kind of cases where the storm is associated with water, as in Britain and Costa Kansas. And I just wonder, there seems to be at least this potential difference between knowledges that we have about selectional preferences, selectional constraints, as compared to just knowledge about or just facts about where we happen to live. So if it happened that one day the Atlantic Ocean were to dry up, right, and the Brits were to find themselves in a quite different situation with regard to weather, not with, yes. It seems to me that, well, the question is, do we want to say that the language has changed or that something about the usage of language has changed? Certainly what people will talk about and the kinds of storms that they will talk about will be fundamentally different, and the way in which they'll use the word abate will be different, or the context in which they'll use the word storm will be different. But if they're competent speakers of the language, they'll, in a sense, they'll already have the apparatus to know, well, when I'm talking about windstorms devoid of water, and I already know what kinds of things will fall together. So it's not, there's no innovation per se in the language, it's just that now the context in which I find myself is leading me to use the terms in a certain way. So I'm just wondering whether you see that as kind of qualitative difference between a sort of real world or encyclopedic.
No, I think I see it. I think you see, I don't take this view of, I don't take this rather logical concept view of semantics in a natural language. I think that this kind of logical semantics that you're referring to is fine for artificial languages constructed out of natural languages. So there could be a term, storm, in an artificial language that has a set of necessary conditions associated with it, none of which have anything to do with lashing coastlines or people getting caught in it. And that would be fine, but it would not be English. I'm very happy to say that the storms, you don't have to go as far as drying up the Atlantic Ocean. I'm very happy to acknowledge that probably in everyday conversation in Kansas, storms are different from storms in everyday conversation in English seaside towns. But what I want to say is that, okay, here's where I'm really coming from, right? Let's go right back to the prototype stereotype distinction. Each of us has or has had a prototypical set of associations with each word that's in our active vocabulary, indeed in our passive vocabulary, but especially in our active vocabulary. These, if we then, like Humpty Dumpty, use the word in a bizarre way, any word in a bizarre way, society, in the form of our fellow students or friends and family, jump on us. You ever used a word wrongly? I have. No, okay. People will tell you, but that's not what diffident means. When I was a very young man, I used to think that diffident meant aggressive. I can't think who I'd met, but or why. So my prototype for diffident was of some sort of rather aggressive behaviour. It turns out that was wrong. Society ironed that out. I think that goes on a massive scale for each individual as the prototypes of the psycholinguistic prototypes in our heads are converted into stereotypes that we all share, that are somewhere out there between us, among us. So having said that, the stereotypical storm, in this sense of stereotype, for a group of English speakers can well be something that lashes coastlines, but if you want to do reasoning, if you want to do weak inferencing about it, then knowing that a storm lashes a coastline is probably a good thing. If you want to do strong inferencing, I'm making this up as I go along, if you want to do strong inferencing, you perhaps need to know then you're going to try. Then what you're going to end up doing, I think, is appealing to some Aristotelian notion of essences. What is the essence of a storm? Well, Quine said that we've out somewhere. He said actually at a lexicography conference in the 1970s that we have outgrown that notion of essences. I'm not sure we have. It seems to come back to haunt us. But I think if there is such a notion, it's a subset of, it's not. I've got some sort of Venn diagram in mind. They are overlapping sets. They're not absolutely coextensive. The essential storm and the prototypical storm are not coextensive.
First, a comment about the usefulness of all this in teaching in pedagogy. And I remember, I think maybe 30 years ago, the day I was taught English, one of the exercises we had to do was we were given a word or a phrase. We would be given like taken by storm. And we asked to use it in a sentence. Yeah. And it involved trying to recover from your understanding of language all the nuances of taking something by storm, and so that you could then construct a good sentence. So that's sort of my question was, when it comes to these patterns, you took take, and then you had these 200 patterns. I don't know what you want to call them, paradigms in which you use them. And you made an assumption, or at least you wanted a desirable property, that these should be mutually exclusive, meaning if you take any usage of take, it should fall into one of these and not multiple categories. To me, that sounds a little dangerous because it puts pressure to create new categories. Don't you want another condition that says that a pattern that I create for a verb, perhaps there is some other verb which uses the same pattern with similar arguments for it to be a bona fide pattern?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I meant mutually exclusive within the same verb. So that would, but yes. Yes is the answer. Thank you. Yeah.
So one of the things that you implied in your talk that you didn't come out and say is that word norms are transmitted from older languages into newer languages. So you used the example in mind with subject and object. There's one other example which I don't remember, but part of Lakoff's theory on metaphors is there's some meanings which are more central than others. So like physical and social relationships are more central. So, I mean, could you combine both of those ideas to posit at the beginning the set of, it's just
Yeah, I mean, that's neat, actually. There is, many people seem to have quite a strong intuition that language, that terms used to denote or relate to a physical external reality are more basic than abstract terms, and that's what Lakoff is doing. And maybe it would be interesting to find out but maybe abstract senses are less open to exploitation. Well, you have cross-domain. So decay is an abstract term, right? No, it isn't. No. Okay, I can't think of it. Okay, but yeah, you do get cross-domain exploitation. You get, and maybe you get it in the abstracts, but basically, yes.